All right, let's get started. Good morning and welcome everyone to the first quarter edition of the quarterly OpenSSF Town Hall. This is a tradition that the OpenSSF has hosted for quite a while as a way for the community as a whole to come together to talk about what's going on, some recent updates, fun news, things to share between the different projects, but also be a nice introduction for anyone new to the project, still learning about what's going on in the different projects and where they might get involved or things that they might find useful in the rest of their work. I'm Brian Bellendorf. I'm Executive Director of, the General Manager for the Open Source Security Foundation, working for the Linux Foundation. And I just wanted to remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded and will be posting up on YouTube. As we start every formal meeting at every Linux Foundation hosted event, there's an antitrust policy that applies to this meeting. I'm sure many of you have read this, committed it to memory, stenciled it on the back of your eyelids. I do encourage you to check it out if you haven't before. It's a way that we all stay clean and legal. I also am happy to remind you all of the code of conduct at the Open Source Security Foundation and the Linux Foundation as a whole. We are committed to providing a harassment-free experience for participants at all of our events, whether they are held in person or virtually. We take it seriously. So thank you for your attention to that. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Please, if we're using the webinar format and the moderated Q&A function on that just to try to make the Q&A part of this really efficient. So please try to use that feature on Zoom to ask questions, and I'll play the role of kind of guiding those answers to the right panelist and getting those questions answered. And anything we don't get around to answering on this call, we'll try to answer in follow-up. So I will give a brief organizational update, just some small bits of news, and then really dive in with our panelists into updates on SixStore, on the developer best practices working group, vulnerability disclosure, securing critical projects, and the Alpha Omega project. And my goal is we leave at least 20 minutes towards of the hour for Q&A and open discussion. Let me give that quick update. It's sometimes hard to get good metrics on how we're doing as a community, but we've assembled some of these here that we track on a monthly basis, and we think you might find useful. We're currently up to 60 sponsoring organizations. These are organizations that provide the funds to do everything we need to do here, and reflect some of that back out to all of you. The current active members are 60. These include 23 Premier and 30 General. I'll show you the logos and 7 Associate as they come up. Very happy to add Coinbase, Alibaba Cloud, ChainGuard, Cloudsmith, Spotify, OpenUK, and MITRE as new members just recently. And should also have mentioned Wipro. I forgot to add them here as well. We also have been tracking the fundamentals of developing secure software courses at edX. There we have had 6,700 people register for that course. Those 3 courses, 6,700 registrations for those courses. We have really some big ambitions to grow that substantially this year, and we think that we just continue to get really positive feedback from folks who go through that. As this is something every open source developer should know. Frankly, every software developer should know. Our engagement through the community has climbed, pretty gradually, up about 10% over the last month in the mailing list membership and visits to the websites and those sorts of things. So pretty nice and active, continuing to build some steady progress on our engagement with the world. Here's the list of current supporters at the Premier level. Their resources give us their financial support, as well as their guidance gives us the ability to go out and have the kind of impact we want to have in the world. So thank you to all of these, including those who have recently joined. And thank you as well to those organizations that have been providing even more broad-based support. Really happy to see the breadth of different kinds of organizations represented here, different geographies, different industries, and also really happy to have now reasserted our partnership with OpenUK and added MITRE to the list of our associate members. So thank you all for that. Really quickly as well, we recently had a TAC election and have seated the new TAC. This is the Technical Advisory Council. This is really the group who are chartered with overseeing broadly the technical initiatives at the OpenSSF and making sure that they hold up to a high standard and are working together across the different working groups and projects at the OpenSSF wherever possible. So congrats to Abhishek Arya, Ava Black, Bob Calloway, Krobe Robinson, Dan Lawrence, Josh Brushers, and Luke Hines, many of whom you will hear from in just a few minutes. Also, welcome back to Ian Coldwater as the Security Community Individual Representative to the Governing Board. Both of these are, both the TAC and the SCIR are elected positions. So thank you as well to everybody who ran in those two elections and to everyone who voted and participated. It was the technical community who participated based on those who had contributed in some way, in any way actually, to the OpenSSF over the last year. Also wanted to highlight that Supply Chain Security Con, which is started life as a one-day event at the Cloud Native Summits, has now graduated to become a parallel event to the Linux Foundation's Open Source Summit, our main kind of industry or open source industry-wide event that is back to taking place face-to-face in Austin, June 21st to 24th. So Supply Chain Security Con will be there. I think have 2 days of content. The call for the CFP is open now and closes pretty soon, I think. So please check that out and participate if you can. And with that, I'd like to pass the microphone to Priya, who can lead us through an update on Project SixStore. And Priya, I'll advance the slides. Just kind of send me a buzzer or mention when you want me to advance. Okay.
Cool, thank you so much. Yeah, so I'll give a quick update on Project SixStore. So we're working on general availability for SixStore right now, which I will talk about more in the upcoming slides. So I'm going to move on right now. We recently hit 1.5 million log entries in Recore, which is exciting. I think almost 500,000 of those just happened in the past couple months. So I think usage is definitely growing. We have a bunch of unique workflows using cosign for signing on GitHub Actions, and a lot of different package registries are in the design phase to use SixStore to start signing their packages. We also have a Kubernetes KEP 3031 almost finished, and with that we should have Kubernetes 1.24 signed with SixStore and cosign, so end users of Kubernetes can start verifying the images produced by Kubernetes. Yeah, thanks. So to get more into SixStore GA a little bit, the goals of SixStore GA are to get all of the major SixStore projects, cosign, Recore, and FullSCO to 1.0 status. So this one is pretty easy for cosign because we already achieved 1.0 a few months ago, but we still need to get there for Recore and FullSCO. So a lot of this work is going to be around getting Recore and FullSCO production ready and stable. We're hoping to be able to tell users that they can expect 99.9% uptime. And once that's done, we can remove all the scary experimental warnings that we have in cosign and other tools around using FullSCO and Recore right now. So hopefully by the time we announce GA, people can be very confident about using the public instances of these services. So focus areas for our GA work, the big ones are infrastructure and testing. And once those are done, we're going to look into documentation and also individually at the projects, adding any features or fixing any bugs that might need to be fixed. So that's going to be FullSCO, Recore, and cosign. So to talk about the infrastructure and testing work that we're doing at the moment, the big one is automation. In the past year, I think we haven't really focused too much on automating a lot of the infrastructure behind SixStore, so that's kind of the main focus right now. This includes stuff like cutting and deploying releases, setting up a staging environment, and automating IAM permissions for the GCP project that production runs in, so that we can kind of have we can see the history behind who has access to the project in version control. We're also planning on setting up monitoring for the different backend services that we rely on, and alerting on those services with alerts to Slack, so that the community can see if anything is wrong. And we're also planning on setting up probers on GitHub Actions, so that if anything goes wrong with GCP, we should be informed of it pretty quickly. In terms of testing, we're looking at load testing, FullSCO and Recore before we announce their 1.0, and in more generally a comprehensive review of unit and integration tests for all 3 projects. In terms of the specific projects themselves, there's not too much work that needs to happen here. For cosign, it's pretty easy. We just have to eventually remove experimental warnings once everything is stable. We're planning on looking at rate limiting for both the Recore and full CO services and adding log sharding to Recore. And once these features are kind of done, we should be able to announce Recore 1.0 and full CO 1.0, which will come with some API stability guarantees, and will help us prepare for GA. Also in progress, alongside all of this work, we're getting a third-party security audit done from a third-party company and planning some sort of on-call system so that once we've announced GA, people who are relying on the public instances of these services can kind of be sure that if something does go wrong, there will be some system available to get things fixed as soon as possible. So how long is this all going to take? I left this slide blank because we're not totally sure just yet. Right now, the goal is around 2 months, but because we also are doing the security audit, I'm kind of anticipating that they will hopefully not find too many things that we need to fix, but there's always a chance they'll find a lot of things that we need to fix. So the optimistic estimate is 2 months, but it will kind of depend on what this audit returns at the moment. I just want to say a quick thank you to all of the GA contributors who have been helping with this effort. I'm sure this list is going to get bigger in the coming 2 months. If anybody's interested in working on GA or has questions, I've linked the project planner or the design doc on this slide. Yeah, feel free to ping me on Slack if you're interested.
Thank you, Priya. And I know since there's some names I don't recognize on the attendee list, some folks might not be even familiar with SixStore. What's like the one sentence pull description of SixStore, just for those who might be curious? And then secondly, I know there's been some signs of interesting adoption out there, particularly the cloud native community. Is there anything you can give as like a stat or a number of signatures made during the pilot or anything like that?
Yeah, so to one sentence description of SixStore, I would say that SixStore makes citing and verifying software, open source software, easy and simple. So it's kind of making things secure by default and making that like the easiest way. So I would say that's like the one sentence description. In terms of a stat, I don't have one off the top of my head. I'm really sorry.
No, okay, I'm sorry to spring that on you, but I've been following obviously the Twitter feed and the project on the outside, and it's really exciting to see the number of projects that even in its pre 1.0 state have picked it up and started to go with it. So that's really cool to see. I'm really glad that we're funding the security audit work through OSTIF, and looking forward to what that returns. And don't worry, somebody will find a bug in the 1.0 release. You'll have to do 101, 102, 1.1 even. Like they say, if you didn't find a bug, if you wait till it's perfect, you've waited too long to if you're not embarrassed by your 1.0, you've waited too long to release it. That was the quote I was trying to remember. So so congrats to everybody who's been working towards that goal, and really happy to see. Thanks. Well, and we're going to save questions till the end. So if you've got some questions about this, certainly queue them up in the Q&A. So Priya, thank you, and we'll come back to you soon. Now let's move on to the developer best practices, the working group focused on that. And Krob, can you lead us through this set of slides?
I would love to. Hey everybody, I'm Krob. I have the amazing honor to represent the folks that work on developer best practices. If you haven't guessed, our working group is focused on helping open source developers learn some good security practices and improve the overall quality of their code and projects. We have 6 core projects within the working group, and there's a little reference architecture kind of showing how we all relate. We divide our work up into things that help people learn, things that help developers identify good practices, and then finally a quadrant where we help the developers adopt these kind of new good practices. Our 6 core projects are the Common Requirements Enumeration Project, which is designed to help identify requirements like 853, for example. It's a list of requirements that developers might want to consider as they are building their projects. We have the existing guidelines for developing and distributing secure software. This is a kind of a Rosetta Stone of where all the really great knowledge is across the internet of how to write code securely and tools that can help you do that, and broken down by language. Pretty exciting little project. We have the OpenSSF Best Practices badge. Formerly was the CII Best Practices badge, but David got smart and we're part of the OpenSSF now. Yay us. And this is a badge that helps identify good practices. We work with projects to help them implement this, and we give them a fancy little badge depending on how well they are able to adhere to these great coding practices. We have a scorecards project, which is an automated way to help collect a bunch of statistics around open source projects. We have the edX course that Brian mentioned, which is around secure software development fundamentals. Amazing work. I encourage everyone, developers or not, to take a look at it. You'll learn a lot. And then finally, we have the SKF, the Security Knowledge Framework. This is a lab environment that helps developers practice and what they've learned throughout all these different elements, how to do secure coding in real life. Next slide, please. Recently, we've had a couple pretty cool achievements. We kicked off a little project called the Great MFA Distribution towards the end of last year. And this is where we were giving away multi-factor tokens to open source developers and projects. And this is a pretty well-recognized best practice for folks that you should use multi-factor identification. Multi-factor credentials don't protect your identity. And we gave out about 102 YubiKeys and 65 Titan keys, and those were both donated by members GitHub and Google. And lots of good response from across the ecosystem on folks. Look, we have an example. Lots of good response from the projects and maintainers on looking to help secure themselves and help improve the overall quality of their code by protecting their identities. Another note, our SKF project just recently had, we went over 70 different developer labs for Node.js, Python, and Java that developers can kind of go through and learn these skills. Very exciting. We just recently took on some work where we're working with the NPM security team to help develop an NPM security best practice guide. We're really excited about that collaboration. And then finally, our scorecards project launched version 4 in February. So cosign, you'll get there someday. But scorecards is doing a great job tracking a lot of different metrics in an automated fashion, helping consumers kind of understand what some of the security qualities are of these different projects. And my final slide for this group, which is probably my favorite working group of all, just so you know, our upcoming projects is we have, we're working on also some recommended compiler option flags for C and C++ programs. Pretty exciting. We think this will be very useful since a lot of code in the open source ecosystem is done in C. We're working on a newbies view. We're going to have some interactive artwork that kind of walks the developer journey through code from kind of imagination out through deployment. And at each stage, we're going to have links to different tools and practices, linking out to things in the developer best practices group, linking out to the security tools group, and other items within the foundation and outside the foundation to help a developer, understand I'm in this particular stage of developing, and I'd like to know kind of what resources and tools are available for me. We're working on package manager best practices document, kind of overall, looking at the different ecosystem package managers and trying to find good guidance to help people, do things in secure ways. And then finally, we're working on the SecCom convention. This is a way to help identify when a commit message in a repository has a security property. So it's a standard we're trying to help encourage people to use. That way, automation can more easily identify this code change was security related, and there's potentially additional actions that need taken. So I encourage you to check out all of our projects. And if anyone's interested, come help us out with this upcoming work. Got an exciting docket for the year and always looking for help. Oh, next up is my favorite working group, the Vulnerability Disclosures Working Group. This is an amazing group of folks that I get to work with. where we're focused on improving coordinated vulnerability disclosure practices within open source. We have a couple projects. First off, we recently published a guide to CVD for OSS projects, which we'll talk about just in a moment. We are working on a white paper, kind of just talking about recommendations overall for how CVD, coordinated vulnerability disclosure, can be done within the open source community. And then we also curate a set of personas, and we're working on kind of exploring the pain points between these different personas within open source. So we have maintainers, we have security researchers, which are called finders, we have suppliers, consumers, and coordinators. So all these different personas within the open source ecosystem have a particular perspective, they have needs and wants, and there's also potentially some friction. You might think about some friction between maintainers and security researchers. So we're trying to identify those problems and find unique ways to help solve some of those. Next slide, please. So recent achievements, we've been working quite a lot last year with the CVE board. These are the folks that help kind of manage the CVE process for the industry. And we've been working with them, and we kind of expressed some, typo, CVD. We discussed kind of open source perspectives around CVD and some pain points we had and some requirements. We learned a lot about the improvements that program has made over the year and what they're planning on doing in 2023. So we're very excited. So hopefully we'll see a much better vulnerability identifier flow in the next coming year. And then, as I mentioned, we published a 1.0 draft of our guide to coordinated vulnerability disclosure for open source projects. So this is a template and a set of resources that any project, one person project all the way up to huge ecosystems like a Kubernetes style project, where folks can take this, look at the guide, and potentially adopt some of its practices, so that really helps ease, so that everyone understands what CVD is and how it can be best executed within open source. Next slide, please. Finally, this year, lots and lots of activity. We'll be changing our attention from maintainers, which we love maintainers, to that other persona group, those finders, those security researchers. So we're going to be figuring out a way to create a guide for CVD to help security researchers better engage with open source projects. There's a lot of misconceptions, and we think we can spell this out and help, again, ease that process so that all users of open source are best served when a finder finds something. We'll be continuing to meet with CertCC and talking about their VINTS, Coordinated Vulnerability Disclosure Program, and their plans on open sourcing that. A bunch of us are presenting at the FOSS Backstage Conference, talking about 0 days within open source and open source CVD. Very excited, so check that out in March if you're interested. We're going to be working on a survey to help learn how the working group can assist open source projects. So we're going to be reaching out to a bunch of maintainers, predominantly through the Securing Critical Projects working group list, but we'll be open, we'll talk to anybody to try to help figure out how the working group could assist those communities. We will be collaborating with the Omega project on kind of helping codify CVD good practices and how folks can best react when vulnerabilities are found. And then we'll also be working on vulnerability report formats this year. And with that, thank you from the Developer Best Practices Group and the Vulnerability Group. Crow out.
Thank you, Crow. Next up, we have Amir to walk us through securing critical projects. Amir?
Yes, hello. Good morning, everybody. Just a couple updates on the Securing Critical Projects work group that myself and Jeff Mendoza from Google co-chair. Couple updates since November. The first main one is we created an initial shortlist of the most critical projects with the objective of that to be to help inform other work groups and projects in OpenSSF, namely Project Alpha Omega and the Great MFA Project. So with the Great MFA Project, you just heard yes from Crow. Thankfully, we were able to help with that. We set a goal as a work group to complete that list in about 2 weeks. So it was about 2 working sessions with the work group and a little bit of work offline. Some caveats: it was not meant to be comprehensive due to time constraints. We didn't want to let perfect be the enemy of good, and we wanted to get something out to help these projects. And the initial output did help the Great MFA project reps to identify some of those projects. So I think that was a great thing that we were able to kind of collaborate within OpenSSF and help and support other working groups. And in the meantime, do something very, very important to our working group as well. And as well, so that list of projects to help Project Alpha, to help inform decision making, and just to provide a little bit of insight onto where resources could or should be allocated to. And we did complete a rough initial short list of 100 critical projects that can be accessed by anybody. The intention was for it to be iterative, the list to be iterative, both qualitative and quantitative. We used tools such as the security scorecards project, as well as criticality score. And for the qualitative piece, we tried to really discuss as a work group the projects that were being recommended for this list, as well as community driven. We wanted it to be a process where anybody in the work group in OpenSSF or in the open source community at large could essentially nominate or suggest something for consideration. And as mentioned earlier, we did complete the first draft in time. So I want to give a big thank you to the work group, to the working group, for coming together and really all hands on deck and focusing on getting this out in time. And so since January, we've been refining that process for a more comprehensive and representative list of the most critical projects. So that will include developing further to prioritize and rank projects. We would love to have a way to find those projects from the famous graphic of all of modern infrastructure. You have that one project. So hopefully we'll be able to shed some light onto those projects. And as mentioned earlier, it's meant to be iterative. So we want to iterate and improve on this process. And also awaiting the release of the full Census 2 project results, which I believe are coming out in under a month, I think a couple weeks even. And that's going to have significant amounts of data that we plan on analyzing with the work group, again, to help inform that list. Next slide, please. Other updates as well through this Securing Critical Projects work group. Open Source Technology Improvement Fund, OSTIF, was briefly mentioned in the last town hall, but OSTIF did facilitate a security review of the Flux project. That one was funded by CNCF, which resulted in 22 security improvements, including the reporting and patching of the project's first CVE. And all of that can be found both on OSTIF's website, as well as the security reviews repo that I believe Michael is going to discuss shortly, as well as actively facilitating about 15 security engagements right now for critical open source projects. We also have the All-Star Security Policy Bot. That is the project that my co-chair Jeff runs. Some announcements on that. It has now been installed on over 20,000 repos and scanned over 20,000 repos in over 400 organizations, and has been enabled on 2,000 unique repos in over 100 organizations. And lastly, just a couple miscellaneous updates. We did a little bit of housekeeping on the work group's GitHub page, including updating some very high-level goals of 1, identifying critical open source software projects, and 2, securing those projects. So again, I want to really thank everybody in the work group for coming together. We typically get very good, lively discussions and a good show. A lot of people show up, and we get good discussions from that. So big thank you to everyone from the work group, and thank you to all of you. If you have any questions at the end or would like to get involved in anything that I have mentioned, feel free to join a working group meeting. We love seeing new faces and getting new perspectives. So yeah, we look forward to seeing from you and hearing from you. And with that, I'm done. Thank you so much, Brian, and everybody.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Mike Scavetta. I lead the Identifying Security Threats Working Group. I'm here to talk to you about that. So we've been kind of a top-level working group since the beginning. We have probably, I would say, four main projects. We have a couple other things kind of in incubation that are just kind of percolating at this point. But the main ones are in no particular order. Security Insights. This is work led by Luigi. And the purpose here is to, make a machine readable security information that for things that are hard to detect. So as an example, if you have a GitHub repository and you distribute on NPM, there's usually a pointer from NPM back to GitHub, but there often isn't a pointer from GitHub to NPM. Understanding that and being able to express that in, I think we chose YAML for the format, but just in a way that can be consumed by things like Scorecard or any other tool, we think provides some value. So this is still in the kind of design and kind of early incubation phase, but we think it has it meets a need where automation is just either not there or not possible. The next project is security reviews. This is a collection of public security reviews against open source projects. I think, Amir, I think we have about 35 or so on the site right now. There's a dashboard, and we're looking to collect more. And Amir is leading this project. There's been some automation to create a fancier view of it, so you don't have to actually look through the repository itself. And we're looking to continue having this integrated into, for example, the next one, the security metrics. The security reviews are displayed within the security metrics dashboard. We want to continue that process where this information is available to dashboards and projects that display things like this. Security metrics, this is metrics.openssf.org. This was an aggregation layer for different sources. So it pulls together scorecard, criticality, best practice, security reviews, and assembles that as one kind of view of a project. This was done as a kind of a proof of concept. We made it kind of MVP-ish. It's pretty clear at this point that the right thing to do is probably to replace it with either LFX security in the kind of medium term or another kind of aggregation layer that's like fully supported and not kind of a side thing. We also don't need multiple aggregation layers doing exactly the same work. So I'm happy to, eventually deprecate this in favor of a better solution. And then finally, Alpha Omega, which if you skip to the next slide, we'll likely, right now, Alpha Omega is, kind of de facto under the Identifying Security Threats Working Group. I think it makes sense for it to be a top level, project. But the purpose of Alpha Omega is to protect society by improving the security of the open source software that everybody uses. But we do this through direct maintainer engagement and expert analysis. So this is different fundamentally than a lot of the other work, and I think it's complementary to the others, where it's not about producing better education that results in better software or measuring things that entice and pressure maintainers to configure something some way, but it's actually going after the source code and saying, is this thing secure or not? And if not, helping it be secure. Next slide. So we officially launched at the beginning of the month. I lead this with Michael Windsor from Google and Brian. Right now we're hiring full-time roles. So we have, Brian, we have 5 on the list. So I think it's a product manager, a project manager, security engineer, and 2 analysts. It's something like that. We're working through the job descriptions, and I'm hoping to get the job descriptions public in the next couple of weeks. we're also working on governance because we realize that, because this is a fully funded project, it needs to have some structure around how we make decisions. So I'm super thankful to Ann Bertucci and Ava Black on helping us produce a governance model that works and is also flexible, but kind of achieves the transparency that we need. We're looking at initial alpha engagements on at least one, probably two major projects that we can engage deeply on over the next year, starting soon, so as soon as we can. And we are refining the initial Omega toolchain analysis workflow, all of that. A lot of this work is dependent on getting these full-time roles hired. This is very much a 9-to-5 level job that is kind of very difficult to do with this kind of thing. It needs fewer people with more time and not more people with less time. So if you're interested in learning more about this, obviously there's the press release. We did a webinar last week. Welcome to view that. Join us on Slack, join the announcements mailing list. As we have things to announce, we'll announce them there. For the Slack channel, come ask questions. I think that's it. Next slide. I think that was it.
All right. Thank you, Michael.
Back to you there.
Yeah, so thank you to all the presenters for going through quickly through their sessions. I'm going to leave this slide up just in the background so folks can see that if they need the links. Obviously, these slides we'll put up on the town hall page along with the recording of this session when we're done. Still definitely interested in more questions. So as things come to you based on any of the content that we talked about, or even other topics related to OpenSSF, please feel free to submit them into the Q&A box. But I'd like to take on the one question we've got in that Q&A box now. We can also get to Mutu's question he asked in chat back and forth. But to start with Luke's question, Luke, do you want to unmute? Can you unmute, I think, and ask it? And maybe we just get some back and forth with you and the panelists.
Does that work?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so I was just saying securing critical projects. So a key aspect to their security is their build system security, how they're generating releases, how they're getting those releases to the end users. We've got Project SixStore in the OpenSSF now. So has it ever been considered, or would it be considered, that those projects could be supported in being onboarded to using SixStore?
I could take a first stab at an answer. Thank you for the question, Luke. I would say so, yes. As more, I would say, formal kind of documentation and excuse me, as more formal documentation and recommendations are being developed as actual resources and materials that we could hand projects, similar to the vulnerability disclosure guide that Krob was talking about. I think it definitely makes sense, as we approach projects, as we talk to projects about doing some kind of security work or security engagement. I think it makes sense to, as part of the stage that involves reviewing the release and build system and things like that, to if they're not using anything, for example, to recommend a tool like SixStore. So I would say so, yes. It would definitely make sense to incorporate these tools and these tools and these guides into the actual projects so that they can adopt these tools and use them and become more secure as a process, I would say.
Okay.
Anyone else, do you have anything?
So just to add to that, I think for Alpha Omega, yes, as well. I don't want to preclude that SigStore is a requirement, but as for Alpha, as we're talking about things, naturally the security of the build system and integrity and things like that would come up, and SigStore being a good option for most projects to improve that. I think that would just naturally come out of there. Omega, similarly, as we leave projects, we have a leave behind packet, or work on a leave behind packet. which would include things like, hey, click here and do this thing to set up SigStore. So that said, I think another approach might be to go after kind of, instead of doing deep dives on a single, project number one, you go after all 100 and more of a horizontal slice and say, can we get all 100 just onboarded to SigStore through some sort of a campaign? I haven't thought about that. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense. That would be another way of kind of doing that if we thought that SigStore was like the high order bit of that what these projects need. And I'm not sure about that, but it's worth a discussion.
If I can add one thing from the from our perspective, we have resources to be able to help with a number of things that help high quality software, high quality services, the kind of stuff we're building at OpenSSF reach a broader audience that we're really eager to look for how to use, whether it's helping with documentation. And by helping, I mean potentially paying people to do this stuff, because I know that's like, normally you want folks to volunteer, and we certainly love volunteers to help us with this too, but I would really look forward to finding ways that we could work with the different working groups and their sub projects on what are ways that we could help expand the number of people who might pick this up by marketing and promotion and funding the development of tutorials and better docs, getting stuff placed in blogs, getting people to speak at conferences. I mean, all the kind of outreach that's really necessary. Specific to this kind of stuff, to SixStore, I think also lines up with this too, is how do we get the stuff baked into the tooling, into the build tooling, and in working with the package managers to get them to look for this stuff and even to consume it, to publish it, and then maybe there's like a last mile, which is actually showing up to major projects, identified by the critical projects list and even beyond, and saying, here's a pull request that adds support for this to your systems, and we'll stick around to make sure it works. And it's not just like a drive-by. But I think all of these things are important. High quality software doesn't sell itself. Sometimes it does, sometimes we luck out, but generally speaking, especially these days, you have to kind of rise above the noise floor with a lot of this stuff. And so I'm very eager to find ways for us to be helpful in across the different OpenSSF projects to go and tackle that. So, all right, I would Mutu like to unmute and ask his question verbally, and then I know there's been some answering on the already over chat, but just so we capture it for the recording and the like. Mutu.
Hi, thanks, Brian. This is Muthu from TTCC. Yeah, I would like to understand a little more about the OSS vulnerability disclosure, how it works, and does it even get reported to NVD? Right, because for instance, right, in our ecosystem, we use a product from Sonatype Nexus that's fully integrated into our DevSecOps. And that's how our developers consume the open source that they need. We call FOSS, so they consume it. And that get even feed from multiple sources of vulnerability disclosure and then feed into that. And we have kept a threshold there. And that's how we centralize, and we can, even the log4j, that's how we were able to contain and remediate, right? So when it comes to your vulnerability disclosure, how that it works, how this disclosed to other consumers, contributors, right?
So as I jokingly said, how much time do you have? I've been involved in the open source vulnerability space for 7-8 years now, and I still learn something new every day. At its most basic level, somebody finds a problem and attempts to report it to the responsible party, the maintainer, the project, and that maintainer reviews that defect report and either agrees with it, yes, this is a bug, it's a security bug, I'm going to fix it, or not, and closes it. And then they will produce a patch and work within their community to make sure everyone has access to the patch, and then they will go public. And as I mentioned also in my typing, there are as many ways that story happens as there are as many different beautiful and diverse people here on this call. Every project, every community does things slightly differently. How NVD, the National Vulnerability Database, is a entity run by MITRE in the United States. There are several other of these vulnerability aggregation databases, but NVD is the most famous. And NVD gets their information from the MITRE CVE database. So when a CVE is recorded, so when that maintainer agrees, yes, this is an issue, this is a problem, I'm going to fix, this is a vulnerability, I'm going to fix it, they get a CVE. And that's when that gets recorded by MITRE and gets pushed over to things like the NVD. The maintainer itself rarely directly communicates with these aggregators. And then you have third parties like a Black Duck or a Sonatype that are scraping not only databases like the NVD, Europe has one, China has one, there's many of them. Some of these companies maintain their own data where they will follow projects and scrape, their GitHub for commits, for example. There's a lot of different ways this happens, but typically when an open source community has a vulnerability, they make sure that everyone that is a participant in that community that has a need to know is informed so that they can take action, and that gets pushed out publicly, and then downstream needs to take that patch and react to it and patch their own products. So like Log4j, that upstream community fixed that, published the source, and then downstream vendors, SUSE, Red Hat, AWS, Azure, all these different consumers took that, developed their own patches and pushed that out to their customers. So it's kind of like a big interconnected web. I have a diagram I was looking for it as part of a working group that kind of explains the happy path for CVD, but there's a lot of ways, a lot of different variations, and a lot of different ways it can kind of fall apart. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, it does, but even in that Log4j case, right, that vulnerability actually exists, for several years, but no one really, gone behind it and, exploited it, right? That vulnerable function was there, but it was created for a good reason, but it created another hole in it, but which was eventually took several years to expose it, right?
Yeah, and that's the beauty of open source is as defects are reported, we have the ability to be very agile and pivot very quickly. So that report came into the Log4j team. They were able to evaluate that, work out a solution. And then, the Log4j team is responsible for the Log4j source. They aren't responsible for the whole downstream ecosystem that are consumers. So it's kind of incumbent upon the provider of that package, like how you got that package. It's kind of incumbent upon that vendor or supplier to monitor the Log4j community's work and be able to provide that to their constituents quickly.
If I can
Sure.
add to that, I think one broad remit for us at OpenSSF, and this is beyond just the vulnerability disclosures working group, is to help answer the question of how do we help people find vulnerable packages and update more quickly, and just have better situational awareness around where there might be latent risk, such as the undiscovered Log4j issue, right? But also to kind of elevate the importance of it amazed me how many people said, well, we're not vulnerable to the problem because we're still on Log4j 1.x. So no worries, even though that 1.x hadn't been under support for 5 years with other several known vulnerabilities out there. I think Dan Lawrence even suggested that projects that are officially, kind of end of life should have a CVE automatically issued for them so that it pops up on people's radar. I do think, look, I remember the early days of like Bug Track and Full Disclosure List and others where like stuff would pop up, and if you were running software, you were parsing this stuff to try to figure out if it applied to you or not. And then we had CVEs, and we have now the NVD and other things. But I think there's still some work to do to go and make it easier, semantically more programmatic to be able to say, I'm building this code, I'm running this code. Where are there known CVEs just in everything I'm depending upon? And how do I quickly update it? So if there's additional standards, additional services, additional kind of databases we should run as a public resource, let's talk about it. And I think that working group is key to figuring that out. But I think there might be other places in OpenSSF that we can be helpful to that.
Right. And things like the CVD guide for OSS is helpful for projects to learn from, reflect, do we want to change? And it provides kind of a a measuring stick. Like, this is kind of the bare minimum stuff we need to do. As you have a bigger, more capable, more mature project, they might have a dedicated security team. They might have dedicated security researchers on their own payroll, so to speak, that can do some of this work. But open source, you have projects that are maintained and created by 1 or 2 people, and then you have things that are maintained by thousands of people. And the experience of those packages, those end products, can be very different. And hopefully, our guide kind of speaks to everyone, and anyone from any size can learn from it and improve how they do stuff.
Thank you, Crow. I want to move on to a question that Vladimir Shingarev asked in chat. Vlad, can you unmute and ask that on the call? Sorry if I'm surprising you. I can also read it out loud, which is basically the question is, SixStore is great, but there seem to be either parallel or complementary efforts out there. I think perhaps more complementary than anything else. In Toto, CycloneDX and SPDX as SBOM standards, Salsa. Are you moving in the same direction collectively? Was this question. And is there coordination between the projects? Is it enough? He's just trying to figure out how all these pieces fit together. And so, Priya, not to put you on the spot, but could you talk about a little bit how you think about working with these other efforts, or how the SixStore team thinks about working with the other efforts?
Definitely. I would definitely say that there is good collaboration with all these different projects. I think a lot of the folks here who are also in the SixStore call attend a lot of the Salsa meetings, the Intoto open source meetings, and I'd say the community is pretty strong, and there's definitely been a good amount of collaboration. I would also say that there are a lot of pieces, so I can definitely understand why it would be difficult to see how they all work together or kind of how they all fit. And in that sense, I would recommend probably reaching out in a more either in the SixStore Slack, or reaching out in the SixStore community meeting, which happens every week, because I'm sure that there are resources out there which kind of explain how to fit all these pieces together. And I think in those forums, we could probably point someone in the right direction.
Yeah, we could certainly use some help if anyone wants to take a beginner's mind to a lot of this and look at how do we talk about these pieces that have come from different places, potentially working into a common whole. I do also want to highlight that the the supply chain working group recently approved a contribution from Citi called the Secure Software Factory, which puts a lot of these pieces together into kind of a template, into a playbook, so to speak. Worth taking a look at, and maybe we can provide an update on that in a future call. I want to get to one last question. I see Andrew Aitken had asked, he kind of clarified Mutu's question. I see Crow wanted to answer it live. Crow, do you want to jump in and
Sure.
repeat the question and then give your answer to it?
Yeah, Andrew clarified, and he thinks Muthu's question was more oriented towards how end users consume that fix more effectively and efficiently. And that really depends on who your supplier of that software is. If you are directly consuming from some upstream source, you should probably monitor their change log, their advisories. If you get it from a commercial supplier, it's incumbent upon that vendor or supplier to notify their end users. So you really, open source is an amazing ecosystem, but it does require some work. You need to invest some time in understanding how these communities work, how they communicate, and where best you can learn. If you're waiting on the NVD, there's lag time. If that's your canary in the coal mine, that there's a vulnerability, there will be potentially days worth of lag time from the time it gets reported up in MITRE till it flows down to something like the NVD, and then down to something like a Black Duck or a Sonatype. So you need to understand how these communities work, how they communicate, and kind of who your supplier is, and work with them to make sure that as a consumer, you're getting what you need to out of this software.
Andrew, do you want to follow up?
I do.
Yep, there you go. Cool.
Can you hear me, Brian? Okay, thanks. So I think it's important to understand the scale of the challenge for, let's say, an average global enterprise, right? They're using anywhere between 10 to 30,000 different open source components. So expecting them to, and they consume through a whole bunch of different channels, right? Right. They consume directly, they consume through third parties, they manage this through multiple different tool chains and multiple different products. And so having that expectation that they understand how and where they're consuming open source, two, having them understand that that they need to be managing this through multiple different practices and processes is far more is a higher degree of expectation than we can have with them today, right? We still have a couple of clients who have an opt-in policy across their developer ecosystem. Once a year, they survey the developers and say, would you please mention which open source components you're using? But if you don't feel like it, you don't have to. And these are large global enterprises, right? So my question, I think maybe to Muthu's is, does OpenSSF anticipate also helping provide through some of these working groups, not just ways that communities can manage this process better, but that end user consumers can manage it better also?
I'll actually jump in and answer that really quickly, which is because I've heard from both you, Andrew, and a few other people that the interests of end users are kind of unique, are worth considering as kind of a first-class actor in this ecosystem. I'm really interested in seeing how do we convene those conversations and figure out, is there a need for a new working group? Is there a need for like even like a SIG or something like that to support that? So just to start out, I created a Slack channel on the OpenSSF Slack called #end users. If anyone has a better term for what they think, this might be to distinguish them, I guess, from vendors in the space, that'd be great. But let's continue the conversation there, because I think understanding those perspectives is really super important. And I saw Michael Scavetta had his hand up to help answer this. So did you want to jump in on this thread, or was
yeah, I was just going to riff on this and say,
Perfect.
like, this is a really hard problem. This is one of the things that makes this interesting, and why I'm here is to solve these problems that, like, it's not just as simple as, well, just have everybody do X, and even to the point of a trade-off between, like, we'll just tell everybody to keep their open source up to date and have it every week. It's just automatic. You delete your lock file and you reinstall. That works great in theory. In practice, there are a whole bunch of challenges, and we'll eventually get there as an industry, but we're still at the point where, like, we all know that we have a problem and we have lots of different ideas on how to tackle this, but we don't know what the best ideas are. We don't, like, there's no standard for this. We're making up the standard as we go. So
thanks, Michael.
Yeah.
And I'll give the last word to David Wheeler, just because I saw he has his hand up and we're at the last minute. So David, go for it.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that there are tools and services that can at least help with the, with the notifications and such. I think in the longer term, I agree with Mike Scavetta that things are still being developed, but I think in the end, automation's key. If we're waiting for developers to figure it out by hand, you're already lost. But there are some tools and services that can help. There are ways we can make things better, and I think that's the longer term direction is automation and ways to make the automation more effective.
Okay, thank you, David. Thank you to everyone who asked questions and participated in the conversation. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to all of you, and see you through all of our different communities, and perhaps next quarter at the next town hall. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.